welcome. I'm Philip Eyre, and I'm going to share my proposal for building healthier communities and families through conscious awareness of CSB. Now, CSB is a contraction, and what it refers to are criticism, sarcasm, blame. Challenges that we have with criticism, sarcasm, blame, and a whole list of other things that include our aggression, rejection of other people, projection of judgments, and a whole host of other things, is that these are things that increase the disconnectedness between people within a community or a family, or even on a larger scale. And disconnectedness is one of the things that is a root cause of some things that we wouldn't even necessarily begin to think have to do with connection or disconnection, because some of us tend to see these as medicalized problems or something to do with genetics. But if I'm able to work with someone who is close to suicide and offer them an experience of connectedness, and watch their desire to take their own lives decreasing, that's a huge discovery for us. And the same thing applies to people who are experiencing depression. If we expose them to the experience of secure, unconditional connection, and their depression diminishes, as I've seen it in my experience and in my practice, then that has very, very far-reaching consequences and a huge potential for transforming our society. We can do the same thing, in my experience, with anxiety, and we can do the same thing for people who are addicted behaviorally or to various substances, so that by providing them with this experience of secure, unconditional acceptance, we get to watch the symptoms of their inner distress diminishing the more they experience that secure, unconditional acceptance. So in order to demonstrate a little bit of how close to home this experience of not being connected is for people who may not be able to jump directly into the emotions associated with disconnectedness, I've asked my friend Zeus to tell a story, and I'm going to share that story with you now. So take just 2 minutes to listen to the story and then to answer the questions that Zeus asks at the end.
Now, I want you to imagine a scenario. You are going on a top secret mission. You're going to be flying on a private jet. You're the co-pilot. And the pilot is somebody you're attracted to. Now, this is such a top secret mission that there is no communication devices, no black box. You can't communicate with the outside world. The outside world cannot communicate with you. And there is gold bullion on this jet. So you take off, you're flying, and near the equator, you've got to make a crash landing. You both survive, miraculously. And now you're on this beautiful tropical island that has everything you could ever need. Clean water to drink, fresh fruit, there's no dangerous wild animals. It is an ideal place to be stuck. How, now that you're on this island, with this special someone, are you going to plan to spend the next 5 years or however long you're going to be stranded there? Now something else happens. The pilot decides to go fishing. And after 24 hours, they don't come back. 48 hours, they don't come back. A week later, they've not returned. Now you realize that you're going to be alone. And so the question is, how are you going to spend your time the next 5 years or however long you're going to be stranded on this desert, on this remote island, all alone?
I may never find out how you answered those questions, but I can tell you what the majority of people have told me in situations like hypothetical situations like the ones that Zeus presented. And what I hear from people is that even though they're on a paradise island and there's nowhere really to go from paradise, even when they're with the person of their dreams, they still have a desire to escape the island, to go somewhere better. What could possibly be better than a place where you have all your food and all your shelter needs and your connection needs and everything met? There is no better place, and yet we have a drive to belong to something greater. And so we feel intense discomfort when we're completely isolated from everybody else. Now, in the second scenario, when the pilot doesn't come back and the person, the co-pilot, is left on their own, what we're taking a look at is not just the issue of belonging, but the issue of connection. And if you imagine being in that situation and experiencing discomfort, a craving to be around other people, and unhappiness being on that island in paradise with all the money, with all the food, with all the shelter that anybody could dream with, if you don't want to stay there and you feel a craving to be somewhere else, what that's revealing is this need that almost all human beings, if not all human beings, have to connect to other people, to connect into some societal experience. And what happens when we're not able to get that need met, we experience something that I describe, or I use the words to describe, as inner distress. And it's that inner distress that is the equivalent of a burning sensation. It's like holding a hand over a flame and not moving the hand. Like at some point, our flesh is going to start boiling, it's going to start blistering, we're going to be in such pain that we will remove our hand from the flame that's beneath it. And the same thing happens with emotional pain. If separateness becomes too agonizing for us, we will do whatever's necessary in order to restore connectedness. And we will suffer when we're not able to connect. But there's also something else that happens. Because we know how that feels, because every one of us experienced that repeatedly as very young children, when our parents weren't able to give us the attention that we needed when we needed it, because they were distracted with other kids or siblings, or they needed to use a washroom, whatever it was, there were times when we got to experience the pain of disconnectedness. So we now anticipate that pain, that feeling of having our hand over a candle and not being able to remove it because it's somehow being held there, and we just want to move away from that. We remember what that experience feels like, and so the awareness that we're about to become disconnected in some way or another will cause us to feel anxiety. If we get stuck in that and we've done everything possible to try and get back to connection with other people, well, we call that depression. That's the futility of knowing that no matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to reconnect with other people. When I'm in that much pain, again, my hand being held above a flame and I can't move it, I am going to do whatever it takes to dull that pain so that I don't have to feel it. And so we know that people use drugs. We know that they have various behaviors to try and distract or to reduce the amount of awareness they have of the pain that they're in that they can't get away from. when there's nothing left to do to take away the pain, we stop trying. That futility, that is the depression that we're talking about. That is what leads to suicide. That pain is what people are trying to numb when they move towards addictive behaviors. Now, that inner distress that a person feels as they're becoming disconnected, or as they're aware of doing things or behaving in a way or being seen to represent something that other people will disconnect from, is a source of what I label inner distress. And in order to defend ourselves from disconnection, in order to address our inner distress, we will do things that are strongly reactive, because effectively that inner distress takes us to a place where we experience a stress response that almost everyone by now is familiar with. And our stress responses, our classic stress responses, are to either go into fight, or to go into flight, or to go into a freeze mode. Some of those fight modes are sarcasm, criticism, attacking a person, projecting my judgments. That's how I react to an emotional threat when there's no way of avoiding it. And what I'm able to do with that information is know that anytime someone's using one of those things, they're doing that because they're feeling inner distress. So I flip that around right now. I've said that if I have that anxiety about losing connection, that stress will send me into fight or flight or freeze. And then I will have a sarcastic outburst, or I'll use criticism, or I'll use blame, or I'll project my judgments onto someone. The reverse of that is, if I'm doing one of those things, then that's a signal to everybody around me and to myself that I'm in inner distress. What I'm proposing is to raise the awareness of everybody that we can about this phenomenon. It's really simple. It's happening all around us all the time, and we tend to just ignore it. It's kind of the acceptable baseline, something that we can't change, something that just is in society. Except that that's not true. Because if we just do the smallest thing, and that's to raise awareness that when we're witnessing criticism, sarcasm, blame, projection of judgments, passive aggression, ghosting, a person lying to us or being deceptive, hiding, all of these may be unpleasant for the person who's on the receiving end of them. But even more importantly, they're signaling distress, inner distress in the person who's using those, who's applying those. So we can bring that to people's attention. It's really, really simple to say, what we're going to do is we're going to assign a certain space in this building or in this community or in our family. And within that space, we're only invited to go, we're only invited to be there when we're being conscious of not expressing any inner distress that we have as CSB. We're going to try to be as aware as possible of that. And even without a person ever going into this new space that we've created, just saying that that's the reason why the room exists brings to their attention the fact that these are expressions of inner distress. Now, the second part of that is that most of us don't want to know that we're in inner distress. It's not part of the way that we see what's going on in the world, and it's inconvenient for us to be conscious of that. It's also the only way that we get to change our societies, by becoming conscious of that. And it's hard to do in an environment where people shame us, when they're not terribly accepting of our distress. But what we can do is we can create an environment that says, I respect your inner distress. your inner distress is no different from my own. And there's no one who's going to come into our community who's not going to have some kind of inner distress. So let's make something that works for everyone. We're going to say that inner distress is something that's okay to be experiencing, and that we respect the fact that you're in a place of inner distress, and you can be in that distress. But if you're in this yellow space, please don't express it as sarcasm or criticism or blame or passive aggression or any of the other things on my list. If you need to do that, don't hold it in. But there's a blue space over there. Go to the blue space. That's the appropriate place for you to express your inner distress. And what that makes possible is for the people in the yellow space most of the time to be able to relax, for their nervous systems to not be afraid of rejection, of isolation, of the things that we were talking about that cause anxiety and depression, and the idea that suicide might be the only way to alleviate the pain that a person's suffering, or the need for addictive suppression of the emotions and the pain that's coming up. So in the yellow space, essentially we've created a sanctuary or a haven where we try to create the conditions for people to be able to relax and to be themselves and to claim all of those parts of themselves that might be difficult outside of that space. The blue space is the place where a person goes when they're not able to contain that expression of the inner distress. Now, the yellow space and the blue space are not the only spaces that exist. There's also the rest of everything. And if someone needs to express themselves in some way that requires a physical expression that might cause harm to another person, and that's the only way that they're going to prevent the bully from continuing to hurt them, I'm not opposed to that. What I try to encourage is for people to do that outside the yellow space and outside the blue space. These are spaces where we try to be without those forms of physical expression, and also dealing with our need to try to comfort another person. Because so much of the time, that desire that we have to comfort or to soothe another person has a lot to do with the inner distress that we're feeling when they're expressing their inner distress in a way that's causing us inner distress. And in a way it's caretaking, in an I consider an unhealthy way, not suited, like, not suggesting that nobody ever do that, but this is something that we maintain some awareness of, and that too is something that's not appropriate for the yellow space. That's something that can happen outside the yellow space and outside the blue space, because it's not suitable for the blue space either. If it's going to happen, and in those situations where that would be really helpful and healing, fantastic, but not inside either the yellow space or the blue space. So the only other piece that I would like to sharpen over here is this idea that when somebody is expressing their inner distress in the form of criticism, sarcasm, blame, projected judgment, etc., what they're trying to do is to gain control over a situation that is threatening them with social isolation, with disconnection. But the mechanism that they've chosen, the strategy that they've chosen, that, or unconsciously, because we don't consciously decide, I'm going to be critical, I'm going to be sarcastic right now, I'm going to blame someone. These are happening unconsciously. But what these unconscious reactions are doing is to drive a wedge between the person who's expressing them and the people that they're trying to connect with. So the irony is that the things that we try to do in order to restore connection and prevent further disconnection actually create increased disconnection. So it's important for us to be aware of that. If you're interested in reducing the levels of addiction, in addressing the epidemic of suicide, of helping people to reduce levels of anxiety, of depression, of conflict in the world, please go ahead and be a pioneer. Initiate a yellow space and a blue space in every place where that's appropriate and where you have some impact on how the development of those spaces get shaped and develop. And I'm here to provide you with support. My contact details are available, and at the basic levels of support and pioneering and helping you to do that, I am completely willing to spend my time and to help you make this happen. There's another level that you will get to when people become aware, including yourself, become aware of this inner distress. And that's the level of dealing with the interpretations that are going on inside us of why we're feeling the distress in response to whatever it is that we discover to be disconnective. And that's something that I work individually with clients on, or with small groups of people. So if your yellow and blue room has a group of people, or there are individuals, or if you're interested in going into that deeper work, which will make you much better space holder or initiator of yellow and blue spaces, please contact me about that as well. Again, my name's Philippa Eyre, and I work with the Learning to Love curriculum. And I would love for you to be initiating yellow and blue spaces in community spaces, in schools, in businesses and organizations, and anywhere that's conceivable where it would be of benefit to address the inner distress that people are feeling. Thank you for your time.